Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is dedicated to general questions about media and virtual production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little time on. Over last week, we were playing with Isadora, and we thought, what if we could create the beginnings, at least, of a AV sync app inside of Isadora? And so we played with it a little bit, and we have just the very seed of it. We thought we'd just kind of walk you through what we're doing to get an idea of what Isadora does there. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking, of course, about Office Hours 2.0, what's been happening, what's been progressing, where we are. So we'll talk about that tomorrow and answer your questions. On Friday, Hovercast will be here. The team from Hovercast will be here to answer your questions about their product. And then on Saturday, is of course the long day. Education at 8 o'clock. Of course, we don't broadcast that. And then at 11 o'clock, we'll be making savory pancakes with Davinci Resolve. I'm pretty excited about that. I went shopping last night, so I'm not doing it late Friday. so anyway, we'll be doing that at 11. And then, of course, at noon, we'll go back to the Belfast method at Todd Reynolds' house this time. So that should be a lot of fun. You get to see behind the scenes. Of course, the links for that go out in the emails that we send out every morning. All right, let's jump into the question, Bill.
Good morning. The first one comes to us from the Seventh Seal in Brooklyn, and the question says, morning, guys. For telestration on the ATEM, what would you prefer, iPad Pro or a Wacom tablet, and why?
I use a Wacom tablet because I need to be able to pump it back. I don't know if I could do what I do the way that I have mine set up. I don't have it set up at the moment. That's why I can't show it to you. The way that I do mine, I don't think that I could see it. That's the issue, is that the Wacom tablet, I was trying to think of why do I use a Wacom tablet instead of an iPad? But the reason is because I have video going into the Wacom tablet. So video from the switcher going into the Wacom tablet. And then I have the Wacom tablet talking to a Mac. And the reason that's important is that way I can see what I'm drawing. So on an iPad, you can draw if you want to use it as a whiteboard. If you want to use it as a telestrator, you just can't see what you're drawing over. That's the thing with the iPad, is when you're looking down at the iPad, it's not WYSIWYG. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, with the Wacoms, you have the larger surface area as well. So if you're just even on the 12.9-inch Pro, if you're doing like a complicated schematic or a math problem equation that gets pretty in depth, it's nice to have the screen real estate to keep going. And when you're writing those smaller numbers, you can get really detailed. Whereas with the iPad, you're basically going to have to go next screen, and you're doing a lot of scrolling back and forth. I have the 24-inch Wacom, and it's amazing, but it's incredibly heavy too. So you need to get the stand, which winds up making it super expensive. So
yeah, I have to admit, we started with 24s. That's what we did the Final Cut user group with, and on a day-to-day basis, for the Final Cut user group, it worked great because you needed to see that resolution. To your point, you needed to be able to see the whole screen. It was impossible to run Final Cut on the smaller, 12-inch or 16-inch Wacom tablet. The Wacom tablet 1, by the way, is the one that I'm moving over to. That's why it's torn apart. I'm missing a cable for it, but the new one is much less expensive than the last one, and it is actually, the ergonomics are better when you don't let it sit around and lose one of the cables. So anyway, but I think that the Wacom tablet makes it easier for you to do WYSIWYG. You can't right now. You can't if the iPad allowed for video input, which it should. It's powerful enough. It just doesn't have the protocols to do that. You'd be able to do it right on the iPad, and it would be way better. Next question.
Moving on, Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York says, on the ZoomISO comparison page, it mentions that Zoom Rooms NDI offers isolated audio. Is it really true, or does that require talent to be in breakout rooms?
Go ahead, Andy.
I'm a liar. No, it absolutely does work. It the way that it works, though, is that it takes the NDI pinned participants, right? So with the Zoom Room, you've got your 3 displays, your physical displays, and then you have your 3 NDI outputs that you can use. And on those 3 NDI outputs, you can tick a box in the back end to enable isolated audio for those 3 NDI feeds. So while it does have isolated audio, it has it for the participants that you've selected in the NDI feeds, and it's embedded in the NDI there. So if you're trying to get out into third-party systems, you have to de-embed that audio in order to be able to get it out there. I think long-term play, we want to see isolated audio in the sense that I could point Zoom at like a multi-channel audio device like Dante Virtual Sound Card, or something like that from the client and be able to statically assign all my ISO outputs and let it roll that way. There's also some Zoom Room Dante integrations that exist there too that you could take a look at. But the isolated audio is there, but it's in that set of 3. So, and then the larger question we're wondering too is like, what happens if we take 3 Zoom rooms, put them all into the same call, ISO audio everybody, and then have them all speak simultaneously? Do you get 3 pieces of audio across the rooms, or do you get presence on all of them simultaneously? And that's not so much a limit of the room as it is the architecture of Zoom only delivering 3 audio channels to a client at once. So there's some things to test to see what it actually does there. At least I haven't seen the results of, but it is available for you.
Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas is up next, and Rupert asks, in high-volume Q&A situations with questions submitted in text but answered in person, is it preferable to group and generalize similar questions together and lose the personal touch, or just pick out the leaders by name?
Good, Bill.
Well, I just wanted to talk about, and this is just from my experience here at what I do when I'm doing question kind of management for the show. I like to, first and foremost, because we have this voting system, to honor the votes. I think whatever people are voting on, I should start there. And if a secondary question has substantially fewer votes, Alex's idea, and I support it 100%, is that the most interesting questions for the most people should get the highest amount of time. That said, I have had circumstances where 3 or 4 questions that usually one questioner asked, even if they're separated by votes, really do make the topic a little more broad to discuss. So I will occasionally move up questions to group them into subject like that. But it's a judgment call on my side. That's where I lay on it at this point.
Yeah, we're at relatively low volume questions here in office hours right now. In events that we've worked on that are high volume, you do get a lot of questions that are similar. And what we tend to do is look for the best written one. In that case, we look for the best written one. We still say that person. So what we'll say usually is, hey, we have a lot of questions about this subject. Here's an example, and here's the name and location of that person. So one person does get that, that positive feedback there. Because we always want to have that connected to the question asking, but we usually either pick the most popular question of that group, or we pick the one that's the most articulate in that sense. And again, we don't do it here in office hours, but when I'm working on shows where we're in a high volume, where we're getting possibly 20 or 30 questions a minute, you start to get into a different state of how you have to manage these things, and you have to be a little bit also. You do get more cut and dry about questions. Like here, we try to get to every question, or we try to do the best we can to get through those. In those cases, you're only going to get to 1% of the questions. You're just doing the best you can. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe in a situation where you're submitting questions live during the show while they're answering them, it may be preferable to have a secondary lane for questions that are spawned from the answers that are being answered. So that way, if there's a related question that somebody enters in as they're answering something live now, it may come in at the bottom of the queue. So you may not get to that related question until much later in the show. But if you had a second lane for responses or lead on follow-up questions to an answer that was just heard, that might be a way to a pathway for those people to ask follow-up questions and not have them delayed to the point that they're irrelevant later in the show.
Yeah, threading is something that it's on our roadmap for what we're working on, and that would allow you to basically, what you eventually want to do is have not only the questions, but you also want to be able to, as someone asks a question, the comments there's a whole thread that's going on against that question, and that becomes even more useful if you make the questions available earlier than the show. So a week before, or a couple days before, people can actually start discussing those questions ongoingly. Next question.
Our friend TJ Asher, often here on the show from Minneapolis, Minnesota, asked the next one. Thanks to Mickey, I now have side tone so I can hear myself through the microphone in my headphones. What are some good guidelines on balancing that side tone with the other program audio coming through?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, if you have individual control over your side tone and the feed of the other people on the other side of the Zoom conversation, balance them so they're equal. Because if you set your side tone too low, it'll make you speak louder to make you think that you're speaking the same level as the other people. So you want to make sure you balance it, and don't set it too high, because then you'll speak too lowly in your side tone.
Now go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, I keep my side tone very low because I actually just want to know the microphone's working, and I don't want it to interfere with anything I'm trying to hear. Maybe it's just my hearing's going a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely talk more normal when I have side tone. That's what I've noticed, is because if I'm listening to something, I have a tendency to raise my voice if I have anything in my ear. Next question.
James Babbitt in San Diego's up next. Is this a good time to buy Blackmagic design products, or would you wait for the new products that seem to constantly come out from them?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Well, James, that's a conundrum wrapped up in an enigma, trying to anticipate what's coming out. You know, you always assume that the next big thing is going to be better than what you have, but you need to think mentally, I think, in terms of what do you have right now that's making you money, that's being productive in what you do. So it's probably better to buy now with what you have, or use what you have, and then whenever the new thing comes along, you can make that decision later on. But the new thing isn't necessarily better.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So I haven't heard any rumblings from Blackmagic Design about anything coming out. They just did some price reductions a couple weeks ago, and they came out with Resolve 17.4. I do have an email in asking if there's going to be any Black Friday deals going on, but Blackmagic, as far as I know, Blackmagic Design has never done a Black Friday deal, unless they've done it through like a B&H or something like that. So, but if I hear anything, I'll let you know.
Go ahead, Bill.
There's a thing, the paralysis by analysis idea. Sometimes you can think about what's coming so much that you don't do something. And if you don't get a piece of equipment, you don't learn it, and then you don't really become facile at its use. So the thing for me is that if you need something, I always recommend, a little bit like Mitchell says, just get it and start the learning process. Blackmagic is a little unusual, and they've delivered so many kind of industry-changing products in terms of their small mixers, if nothing else, that we all use around here, that if you were waiting for, you're constantly going to be having to upgrade because these things are coming out so fast and the capabilities keep adding so quickly.
Yeah, I just, with Blackmagic, I definitely try to put it off as far as I can, and then I just buy it. And you want to know that it's going to amortize, whatever you're buying. Exactly what Mitchell was talking about earlier, was just, you got to buy it and then just know where the money's going to come from to pay for it. And that might be learning, or it might be enough jobs that are going to pay it off, and then you don't feel bad about it. And most Blackmagic hardware I've used for years. Especially because you're buying into 4K, you're buying into things that are a little bit more future proof. You don't spend a lot of money, and then I generally have paid them over and over and over again off. There's very few of them that very few Blackmagic products that I've bought that didn't pay for themselves within a year and then keep on paying for themselves. So it's usually a pretty good investment. That said, I'd probably wait until January. Next question.
Scott Mueller, Germantown, back again. He asked this time, has anyone on the panel used the remote NDI connections on NewTek's NDI 5 bridge? If so, what are your thoughts?
Go ahead, Guy.
It's super cool. So ready for playtime? So this is NDI Bridge running up in the cloud. So locally, I'm joining, actually this join is my local machine. And so I'm sending out right now a couple feeds to this instance here, which I'll cut over to. So this is a T2 free micro up in the cloud hosting. So it's hosting with this IP address. And then I have another instance. This is Parsec over here. Parsec's running Livestream Studio, as well as this here is Studio Monitor. And up in the cloud, I can PTZ. I could control this camera that's behind my head. So I'm on the ground. This is up in the cloud, and I'm PTZing, controlling this camera with sub-second latency. And everything in my network will appear if I go to add anything. These are my local cameras here. Again, this Parsec machine is up in the cloud, and I can see with the NDI bridge all of my sources that are on my network. So that's what the bridge does, is it allows me to join a remote network, whether it be at a facility, master control, and just send high quality around. Now, it's all dictated by this, which is if I change these encoder settings, I could change it to ultra high quality, which would be 24 megabits a second, or I could change it to full NDI, which would be 120 megabits a second. So it's very high quality video. So that's NDI bridge in a nutshell.
Does that change the latency as you turn up the quality?
It doesn't on the H.264, and I haven't got HEVC to work yet to test those latency settings. But the NDI, full NDI, is like 2 seconds, so it's really, and then
it's more of a
there's
transport at that point.
Yeah, and there's a do not transcode button as well. I haven't tried that one, but the full NDI was hitting 120 megabits a second, and I'd snap my fingers, and it would take 2 seconds at least to get up all the way.
Right.
But it's beautiful. I mean, having PTZ tally your whole network with just a free app is like, we were doing this before with Bird Dog Cloud, and it was like $90 a month. So it's free. And
have you measured
PC only?
Have you measured the actual, I mean, you said sub-second, but have you actually measured the latency?
Actually, that's funny. I was just talking to Jonas this morning because we're trying to figure this out. He has a little app that we can use to get the exact, because I didn't want to come in and quote, exact numbers. So he gave me some tools that I'm going to get some real numbers. So if we ask this question later in the week, I'll have the information.
That's perfect. Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas asks, should we be using multiband broadcast processors for Office Hours 2.0?
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, we actually got two different processes to look at. You can look at the vocal chain, and then you can look at your mastering chain. So for the vocal chain, you probably want to put in a de-esser, a declicker for the voice, an RX9, and then RX9 noise reduction. And then after you do all your processing and compression and everything else in your voice chain, then you would go to your mastering chain. And there are all kinds of plugins for your mastering change. Multiband would work, and that is one way to go. But then there are a host of other, just adding a little bit of compression, a little bit of EQ, a limiter, and a few other choice plugins for your mastering chain.
All right, go ahead, Mitchell.
Douglas, your question specifies broadcast, and broadcasting processors have very specific controls and adjustments for peak limiting, and in some cases pre-emphasis and de-emphasis and multiplex. There's a lot of things that are going on. You don't really want a broadcast processor. You want a general purpose processor. And if it breaks it into multiple bands, as you suggest, that's good. But I would go, if you had to go with a piece of hardware to make it sound like the radio, the folks at Omnia make a product called the Volt. And it's about $3,000 as a hardware device goes. But all you really need is just a basic AGC processor like the old Compeller, which I don't think is being built anymore. But that would equal out everything else. But broadcast is meant to be loud and sometimes obnoxious, and that's what we don't want to be.
I think that, and also if you listen to the audio inside of Mukana that I believe we're still streaming, Mickey does a fair bit of extra work on it. So the broadcast that we put into Mukana is actually much higher quality than what you hear in Zoom or the live stream. So it's definitely possible to do more of that, and we will do more of that as we move forward. Next question.
Seven Scroll in Brooklyn, New York is asking, the Office Hours family, anything special planned for the 600th episode? I believe Sunday coming.
I think it's Sunday. I don't have anything special other than we'll talk about the last, 100 episodes. Like that'll be, hey, we did another 100. I don't have any, I will admit I don't have any specific things that I have planned. Does anyone want to do anything specific? Do we have to have a 600? Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Maybe Damiante could teach us how to bake a cake that'll hold 600 candles.
But with masala cake that will hold that would be that'd be cool. Yeah, that'd be good. I don't have any. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Deep fried Twinkies, please.
Deep fried Twinkies. That seems so good and so bad all at the same time. Anyway, all right, let's go to the next question.
Moving on. Seventh Scroll back again, saying, for those who have used 8020 to build sets, can you share pros and cons of using it? Picks two, please, if possible.
I don't have a lot of cons to doing it. So I will admit that I love 8020. Let me show you a couple. Let's see here if I can pull this up here. Let's see. So I just want to show a couple examples since no one else has raised their hand yet. So one of the interesting uses of 8020 is if you look at this, that's a whole set, and that's all built on 8020. So that whole set has a 8020 substructure. All of the panels across that, the shelves, the windows, everything else is all held together with magnets. So you literally, there's rare earth magnets in the 8020. I had some photos of it, but I don't know where they. See if we can jump to another. But yeah, so all of these, I don't know if I have any behind the scenes there. Now the other thing is that here, this is a desk made from 8020. So obviously there's some covers here, the things that are built onto it, but this is the desk that ran that studio. But all the substructure here, and you can see in the behind is all 8020. I could keep on showing you lots and lots of examples of 8020. I have to admit that I was not a big fan of 8020. I felt like it wasn't client facing. So we built some stuff early on, and Marty Brennis, who's been on here a couple of times, loves 8020, and I was like, oh, this doesn't look good, and blah 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 blah. And then once you start building with it, it's like an adult tinker toy. Courtney, is your thing not working? Is your Q question thing not working? I just want to know if it's broken. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Sorry, I was just wanted to ask you for those that are uninitiated, I know what it is, but to explain what 8020 is, it's an extruded aluminum it goes together with
notches.
Bolts.
It's got notches. It's basically Tinker Toys for adults, and it is speed rail, and if you have speed rail and possibly the maker pipe, which I'm testing right now, I'm about to test in about 2 weeks. Or the an 8020, that you have kind of everything you need. So it's an amazing like Tinker Toy. So every studio I walk into, every control room, not studio, but every control room that I walk into is all built with 8020 as the substructure, and then everything else is added on top of that. Now, next question.
Comes from Dennis Champion Walker, who's been on the panel a couple of times recently, at least from Southend on the Sea in the UK. I'm planning to bite the bullet and get an ATEM soon. What are the panel's recommendations for accessories such as HDMI cables? He's looking for reasonably priced, which is under £50, UK things to add to my Christmas list.
Go to Roscoe.
Yeah, I prefer monoprice over anything you're going to get on Amazon as far as the cables go. But I know some people even pay a little bit more. So sometimes don't cheap out on cables. Buy good quality. But I've had good luck with monoprice myself. And then the other two things I'd say is 2 rolls of gaffer's tape. If this thing's going to move around at all, or if you need to secure down lines, gaffer's tape is wonderful. Do not use cable ties.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I 3D printed stand legs for my ATEM, and it works really nice. That's very low cost, especially if you have a 3D printer. Otherwise, you can get them fairly cheap. And if you do, we'll go for the higher end. Get yourself a streaming bridge if you've got the cash, because that's a great little device. I've got it running to my basement out to the stream machine, and it's pretty invaluable.
Good, Mitchell.
Yeah, whatever you get the same ones, because once you find something that works for you. And the other thing is a cable management issue that would help things out. Hold on just a second, I'll pop this up. This is the back of my ATEM, and as you can see, there's a lot of connections you can put on an Extreme. But I have a little sock that unzips. I'm sorry, it's out of focus. There's a little sock on there that unzips, that covers all the cables so they don't get pulled on. Because what's going to happen as time goes on, if you need to access anything, it's really hard to get behind there comfortably, especially if it happens to be in a rack or a desk. So my point is, B&H, I guess they sell the Pearl Stone, but try to use a little cable management to take the strain off the cables as they go into your ATEM.
Yeah, the one as a note. I usually use monoprice. I have had a consistent problem with control of the camera through monoprice cables. That I finally have lined it up with. I have every monoprice cable I'm putting in, I'm not getting control of my camera. When I simply switch it to the Uni cables, which I kind of tend to use. These are UNI. cables that I get on Amazon, they work. The camera works fine. I switch back to the monoprice HDMI cables, and they stop working. I buy a lot from monoprice, so it's a little bit upsetting that I've stopped using the monoprice HDMI cables with my cameras because for some reason the return isn't working. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I had a problem recently in setting up that thing for Sky's mixology thing. Jim Hankins had sent an ATEM Mini Pro that was built into a beautiful Pelican case with a little monitor in the lid, and it was all bolted together. But I couldn't get a signal into it at all. And I think the problem is that the short cables that he used to go from the back of the ATEM to the back of the case to the pass-through, to the HDMI pass-through in the back of the case, wasn't carrying the EDID signal or the DCI signal. So whatever you plugged into it wouldn't talk to it. If it was at the right, if it happened to be at the right signal level and the right resolution, it would work. But if it wasn't, it wouldn't handshake. So you got to be careful about the cables that you choose. The little skinny cables with the short connectors may not have all the wires in them.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael said, are there any lower cost open source alternatives to Unity Intercom for production communication in the cloud?
Unity is the lower cost version. Like that's the one that, go ahead, Andy.
The only other thing I'd say is if you wanted to roll your own, you could use like Mumble and Murmur servers together to set up your own thing. If you truly wanted to use something that was like open source and you could build from the ground up. But I don't necessarily know that I would recommend that, but it would be open source.
Yeah. I mean, Unity is mostly that's usually as cheap as it gets, what it actually works, and you don't have to roll your own. I don't know of anything else that's going to be less expensive than Unity. It's compared to what I use most of the time, or I have used most of the time over the last 10 years, which are ClearCom, Agent ICs. Unity is very cost effective. Go ahead, Roscoe.
We've had students effectively use Zoom for comms and, running on iPhones and that kind of stuff. I wouldn't recommend it, but it does work for really cheap. And
yeah, you can do that. Next question.
John Fulton. So
I want to back up just one second. I just want to back up when I said that. Here's the thing is that you absolutely can do it. So Roscoe is correct, and students can pull it off, and you can get it through. Comms are half your show. So when you don't spend money on comms and you don't spend the effort and the architecture for comms, you're cutting your show off at the knees. And so you can survive a show without comms or without good comms, but the better your comms are, I mean, literally it makes half the quality of your show. So when you start building complex PLs and point-to-points and groups and everything else, your whole show just starts to run smoother and smoother and smoother because you have the ability to communicate. So it's really not worth cutting too many corners once you get into a professional arena. If you're students that are putting something together, totally fine. But if you're really trying to do something that you care about, don't ever think that, we'll just get Zoom to run. We work with clients, so like, why can't we just use Zoom? And I'm just like, there's a whole nother life out there that is amazing. Next question.
Okay, from John Fultz in Salisbury Grove, Pennsylvania. He says, if you use an ATEM 40 by 40 router and a Constellation, what's the preferred way to set it up?
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, well, I definitely will defer to Alex on sort of other projects besides Office Hours 2.0, but we do use both of these in the 2.0 stack. One of the things that's really interesting about the Constellation as of one of the latest firmware updates this summer is that it actually has the Video Hub protocol inside of it. So things that can control the Video Hub can control the Constellation's input-output routing. For us, that's been really helpful to elevate sources into the MV16 by using the same protocol that we could have used on the 40 by 40. Now for us, the way we've set it up, the 40 by 40 is really to help us serve additional inputs to the Constellation to then work with there. So if we wanted to swap something out on a day or do some internal routing between things into the Constellation, then it's there sort of as a buffer. I guess my point is that what's neat about all of it together is that the Video Hub isn't strictly speaking necessary in order to do some of the things that we're doing, because the Constellation has the Video Hub protocol inside of it now, which is really, really handy.
Yeah, so the Andy's absolutely right. There's so much I/O in the Constellation that it's kind of up in the air whether you need both of those things. Generally, the way I've worked with the Constellations is that the first 20 go through the router, go basically in and out of the router. So half of the router is taken up by just passing the first 20 signals into the Constellation. That means I've got 20 other outputs that don't interact with the Constellation, don't end up in my program feeds or anywhere else, or don't have to be managed by the Constellation at all. And the router can simply do that and manage what those are. That may be me being old fashioned, so, and that's exactly the same way we did it with the 4MEs and 2MEs before that, because they only had 20 inputs. The Constellation has, of course, 40 inputs. And so we have a lot more there to work with. And so I'm not entirely certain it's necessary. But it's something it's just something I've always put a router, like for the last 10 years, there's always a router connected to my switcher, because it even here, I have an 8x8 matrix HDMI for my Extreme, just because I'm just used to, like, I want to be able to double up outputs or use this 3 times or do something else over here. And sometimes I just want to cut the switcher out of the system so I can see what's going on. Like, that's the other thing is that there's sometimes I just want a raw feed of that, and then that's also where the next step past that is, of course, using, breakouts, so you can, on the back, patch panels. And then that allows you to have hard access to those things. And when you absolutely need to know what a signal is doing, you can just plug in there and look at it and see what's coming out the other end. Next question.
Rupert McCrae, Dallas, Texas. What are your thoughts on yesterday's coverage of office hours and the Belfast method on the NPR show Here and Now?
We're on NPR. It's a new graduation from it. I'm afraid that I looked at it. I was excited about it. I retweeted it. I haven't seen it yet. I haven't heard it yet. Yesterday, it came out on a day that Tuesdays are my very, very long days. So I haven't seen it yet. Has anyone else seen the coverage? Did anyone have any? Not yet. So Here and Now is one of the National Public Radio syndicated shows. So it's pretty exciting that the guys working on Belfast got some PR out of it. So definitely check it out. You can I tweeted out the link, so you can look at that, and maybe someone will throw that into Mukana so that you can check it out. But it's exciting. It's very exciting. Next question.
Absolutely. Mitchell Hill is up next from Wilmington, Delaware. And here on the panel, MixFX just released a 32-button Stream Deck companion profile for full control of the ATEM Extreme. Does anyone plan on using it?
I definitely want to use it. I haven't put it in. Mitchell, have you tried it yet?
I'm just installing it, and one of the challenges is that the companion, as it stands, of the version doesn't support it quite yet. So ATEM has a beta version that will do it, so I've got to upgrade to the beta version to get it to play. But it sounds like a great idea. 72 buttons, or 72 pages of buttons to control all aspects of the ATEM Extreme. Seems like it's extreme.
Yeah. Next question.
Next one comes from Hazma Kajar, our friend in Cape Town, Africa. I sorely miss Aperture from Apple for managing my photos library. I have Lightroom and Luminar from Skylum. Never deep dived into either of the two. Are there other recommendations before placing my precious library into any of them?
Go ahead, Bill.
Before the pandemic, I used to do a good little bit of photography as part of my regular practice. My clients all wanted me to do headshots and things like that. And I had transitioned out of all the Adobe products. And so I was looking for something, and I picked Luminar. There were a lot of things I really liked about it. It's built on a foundation of trying to get as much, I would call it low-level AI, into the process as part of it. And as such, it's really easy to take still photos and enhance them using some of their predetermined filters, I guess you would call them, and then determine how much you wanted to either increase or back off those pre-packaged effects, including taking them entirely off so you can do everything manually. I love the fact that that made me incredibly productive in terms of retouching something like a corporate headshot very fast. I assume they continue to add those kind of AR-inspired tools into the process. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to keep up with that because I haven't done any photo shoots in the last year because of COVID. So I'm not using it as much as I used to.
I will admit that I'm still trying to figure it out. I still have an old library of things, of Aperture library, which you can still hack. There's a hack you run a little routine and it'll let you run Aperture on a 64-bit machine. So I still have pieces of it there, and I just haven't figured out what to do with it. Like, I have to admit, I haven't been able to successfully. I can get all the photos out of it. I just can't get all the ratings out of it. And there's like days and months worth of rating images. That has been the problem, is that as I've tried to move it out of there for years, it's like some weekend I'll go, okay, I'm going to finally get the Aperture moved out. And then I don't because I can't get something to work. So getting all the photos out of there is not hard. It's just that everything will get reset to nothing. And that's been something that I haven't been super excited about. But it's coming. My goal is by the end of the year to have it in something else, but I haven't decided what either. So I'm with you, Hosmuk. We got to figure this out. Maybe we'll do a second hour where we talk about photo management, and so we can talk about what everybody does in that process. Next question.
7th Scroll in Brooklyn's back with Blender or Cinema 4D. What's your preference? I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. Family for interactive virtual experiences, panel, cooking, class, and so forth. Would you rather a MixPre 6 or an X32, and why? Sorry about that.
Most of the time, I would use an X32. It's if you can. The advantage of the MixPre is the noise reduction and the portability. Of it. Those are the two big advantages to it. 32-bit float is good, but I don't use it that much. So I think it's powerful when I'm in the field and I know that I can record 32-bit float and I know that I'll always have that data, but I don't use it every day in a live environment. The X32, especially the rack, which I seem to buy like chiclets, is, it's got Dante, or it can have Dante if you can get the card. And then you just have an enormous amount of routing and IO, much more than the MixPre 6. So, if I have to choose between the two, I'd probably choose the X32. But if I was in the field or need to be portable, then I might make other decisions. Since no one else has raised their hand, we'll keep moving. Next question.
Okay, now we get to Mitchell Hills that I bobbled earlier from Wilmington, Delaware. Blender or Cinema 4D, what's your preference?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Well, it's unfortunate when you have to answer your own questions. So now it's more of a statement than it is a question. So my statement is, it's how you use it that makes a difference. I'm not a real good designer of three-dimensional objects, but I am a great guy that moves pixels in a program like Motion or After Effects. So if you just need a program that allows you to assign surfaces to materials or to export from one thing to another, Blender will do the job for you if that's how you use it. So I find myself using Blender, which is an open source program, a lot more for prepping 3D images in order to get them into After Effects so I can use Element 3D on it. So that's my statement.
Yeah, I think that for me, I have both of them on my computer. It just depends on how much time you want to spend. If there's a little bit of time learning Cinema 4D or Blender, Cinema 4D, once you know it, is a lot faster than Blender. So like to do complex things or to do complex surfaces or to do UV, setting up the UVs and so on and so forth. All of those things, in my opinion, are a lot faster in Cinema and a lot more powerful. So Blender is free, so I think that there's a lot of reasons to use it. I think that the hard part I have is just the amount of time it takes to get things done in Blender is a lot longer, and I value my time a lot. So if something's going to be faster, I tend to pick it over money. Next question.
Jason Robert Shaw, Sarasota, Florida, back with looking to add a HyperDeck Studio HD Plus to an ATEM Mini Extreme ISO. Is there a direct connection? Is it only through a network? And how does that work? Best practices for setting this kind of thing up, please.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I have one. I haven't used it as much as I'd like to, but I bought it maybe a month ago. And in order to get the SDI into your ATEM, any flavor of ATEM, you need to use a converter, and in my case, I used a Blackmagic 3G SDI to HDMI converter, and you use two of them, one for the regular video input, and the other one outputs an alpha channel, which allows you to cookie cutter a cutout into the video to allow it to be keyed over something else. The only problem to be careful of is make sure you upgrade not only your HyperDeck Studio, but also those converters, because there was an issue with timing both converters and the outputs of the SDI on the HyperDeck so that your image was slightly offset because the ATEM wasn't coming at the same timing as the main video channel. So that's a simple way to do it, and it's a best practice. Just keep your things upgraded, and there are a lot of devices out there that will do that conversion if you don't have to be stuck with Blackmagic.
And it has HDMI out, right? The Plus has HDMI out.
It does indeed. However, you don't get both channels for
key
the
fill.
alpha channel.
Right. So if you want to, if you don't need key fill, then you're able to make that work, right? Yeah. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and if they do have to be on the same network. If you go to your software control, you'd click over here on the right side to media player, and you'll see your HyperDeck show up there. If it'll detect them if they're on the same local area network, so they both have to have network cables plugged in. You'll see them there. Then you'll have remote controls over them, and control them, set them to automatically start playing when you select them, etc. But yeah, they do have to be connected to the same network over the Ethernet.
Next question.
Moving on, Jack B. in Phoenix, Arizona says, what's the best way to import footage recorded on an iPhone 13 Pro Max?
Go ahead, Bill.
I always try to do things wired if I can. If I'm sitting at my desk, I mean, for a while, it seemed like Apple was going to try to remove all ports entirely and make everything wireless in and out of that. Thankfully, we now see from at least the newest iPads that they're moving towards USB-C, a higher speed connection for the port. But right now, if all you're stuck with is a Lightning port, you can still just connect that, and the intelligence built into the operating system will usually bring up your photos library and allow you to import directly into wherever you want to on your computer from that. So I'd always go with the wire if you have the chance to.
Next question.
Rupert McCrae is up next from Dallas, Texas. And Rupert says enterprise employees attending conferences will often have cost center codes to book their time to, with an allowance per year for such time. How might such time be tracked if virtual conferences become much more distributed over time?
Go ahead, Craig.
So just quickly, I would mix the virtual conference attending with overall training and self-improvement. Typically what we've found is that people spend less time than we want them to on that sort of activity. Obviously, physical events clearly have a much bigger cost. And so one of the things that we do, so typically we're expecting 30 to 40 hours a year. But one of the things we do is curate a list of virtual events that we might be speaking at or attending or want to attend, so that people can look at the list and say, "Oh, that's a good one. I'll do that," and then we get more attendance that way.
Yeah, the Zoom. I mean, Zoom knows when you entered and when you exited. So theoretically, any kind of a lot of these events could actually generate a report for how long someone was there and those types of things. So there are tools within them to know, how long someone might be present if people really wanted to track it. I will say that companies that want to track things to that detail, I'm really glad I don't work there. So the anyway, that's all. I don't think ticky tack is part of the future. I just think that I think we're going to get past, there's a lot of people who want to ticky tack hours and numbers. I think that's part of what people don't like and what, is part of the great, resignation. Go ahead, Rupert.
I think we typically see this in, professional firms where dealing with people who have billable time and they just have to either account for their time or bill it to somebody. So it's just those kinds of scenarios.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I got paid. I was on a billable time, and I got paid a lot of money to do that, and it just drove me absolutely crazy. To have to try to figure out what I did when, and I had to do it in real time. I had to do it at lunch and at the end of the day because otherwise I'd forget what it was. But it was something like even no matter how much I was getting paid, I was like, this isn't worth it. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next with Unity purchasing Weta Digital along with the latest 2021.2 release supporting native M1 editing. Would Unity be a better engine to work with for Mac users versus Unreal?
I'm starting to think it will be. I think that we have to see but I think that Unity may turn out to be a better platform. The Unreal is unusable on the Mac, and to add that the Unreal engine to generate things is unusable on the Mac, in my opinion. I really tried. I really wanted it to work, and it doesn't work very well. I think that with Unity's purchase of Weta Digital, which is the engineering side of Weta, which happened yesterday, I think that it's really neck and neck. Suddenly, that they've solved a whole bunch of problems really quickly, and Weta has been deep in the kind of game engine development. You've seen them on the Apple stage a couple times. Now Unity doesn't have to So they brought Apple brought Weta on over and over again. I don't think Unity had something ready to show. Now, my prediction is the next keynote with Apple will show Unity, doing what Weta was doing before, with their game stuff, and that's going to be that will even the playing field if it wasn't already evened, and probably lean it towards Unity as far as that goes. And so it's a fascinating thing to watch. The business go back and forth. We thought that Unity was all but out before Epic sued Apple, and now it's a horse race. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back again. Would plugins like Waves Abbey Road Saturator, Abbey Road Saturator, and he's got a link there, give you pleasing saturation in the digital domain?
Go ahead, Michael.
Absolutely. You would love the sound of that. And there's the Waves J37 tape machine that the Beatles used is awesome. The sound off of that tape machine is the sweetest noise you will ever hear. And it's just amazing. The flavor of the day, if you're looking for a new saturator, is the PSP saturator made by PSP AudioWare. And it's on sale for $69 through the 14th of November. And it's been rave reviewed and is set up for the M1 right now.
Mitchell?
Waves makes a lot of great plugins, and full disclosure, I test a lot of them for them. I don't think you want to use a Waves plugin to change the sound of something. I think you want it to process the sound just enough so that it provides a consistent and pleasing sound, or it protects equipment down the line. So if I were to use a Wave plugin, with all due respect to Michael, I would use like an L2 or an L1 ultra limiter, ultra maximizer as they call it, just to make sure that the peaks don't go overload, because they're limiting processors. You don't hear them working. And to me, a processor that you don't hear is the best kind of processor that's available, whether it's a plug-in or anything else. And then on the other side of the coin, the big broadcast companies, Omnia and Orban, are now creating virtual processors out on the cloud. So you don't necessarily have to buy a box anymore. You can just process it out on the cloud. I think it's called an EXP or something like that at Orban. It makes great sounding processors. My preference is the Orban on the cloud. It just sounds great.
That's great. Next question.
Danny Law in Malaysia says, there have been videos of the new MacBook Pro M1 Pro and the M1 Max being put to the test with Davinci Resolve Fusion. Wondering if there are similar tests done in Final Cut Pro on these new MacBook Pros.
Go ahead, Alex.
Scott Simmons has done that over at the Pro Video Collaboration or Coordination or something like that.
Coalition.
And he's Coalition, that's it. Thanks, Phil. He's done some tests of Final Cut Pro, Resolve, and Premiere. And he's found that Final Cut Pro is faster in some cases, but sometimes not faster than it was on Intel. So based on his tests, he thinks that not all of Final Cut Pro has been refreshed for the M1 Pro and more recent chips and stuff like that. So only parts of it have been optimized. So it is not the fastest. So there is a video out there that's been doing those tests, that comparison.
And I think, though, that I'd be curious whether he tested the Apple ProRes in and out of the computer and what the performance is. Because everybody that I've talked to that's used Final Cut with the Macs that has the Apple ProRes chip is talking about render speeds that are, 10 times faster than they were before. So I think that it depends on what you're, what chip and what you're doing. And for Final Cut, the reason I stay focused on that is because I don't put anything into it other than ProRes. so everything's ProRes by the time it gets into my project. So I'm assuming that chip would really speed things up. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, the whole point of Apple's approach was that the hardware, the software, everything is under one roof. So if engineers are having any issues with their pre-release version of new M chips or anything else,
you'd think
they just call somebody in-house and go, hey, I'm under the same non-disclosure. You just tell me everything you need to tell me about the hardware, and I'll
in most companies, you'd think that would be enough, but it's not always.
Not
enough.
Always.
Because one team will tell the other team that you should fix that.
Yeah. I will say that there's always these little teething things. Remember, these are brand new chips. This is a new technology that has never been there. And the fact that they moved like all the GPU circuits onto the silicon right next door to all the IO and everything. I mean, there's just no wires, there's no buses, there's no anything. It's all just there processing in one big screaming array of bits moving everywhere. Means you're going to get as fast as possible, sticking with everything that's in that.
I really don't need a laptop, and I'm so tempted just to do editing on. But I'm gonna keep holding off and see if I can get a Mac Mini. Go ahead, Mitchell.
I concur with what Alex is saying and Bill is saying is that come on, it's all part of the same house, isn't it? So it seems to me that when a new silicon came out for Apple, that the Final Cut has already run through all those paces, and everybody else has to play catch up. So Final Cut generally is faster than anything else out there on a Mac, no doubt about it.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
As soon as you put the name Pro on something, the pros will appreciate stability over speed.
Yes, but I would say that it's pretty fast and stable. Go ahead, Alex.
Fun fact, the two new features that are in Final Cut Pro this year, namely depth editing and tracker, those were sessions at the WWDC 2018, and there were demo videos during 2018 WWDC. So I can imagine the members of the Final Cut team not knowing anything about that, being there, going along to WWDC and finding out about it and coming back and telling the team, oh, we're going to do this next. And they said, no, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. And then maybe in 2020 or something like that, we'll be able to do that. Or 2021, as long as we've done the other things we need to do.
And there's been just a massive set of changes that had to be done, for Final Cut in Motion and everything else, moving to 64-bit, moving to the M1 platform. And so there's just been a bunch of things that they've had to do. So people say, well, they're not that productive. They haven't given us a lot of features. But most of the best features are the ones that are hidden that just make everything run better. So I think that they've done an enormous amount under the hood, and it's really set them up to do a lot more as we move forward. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next with a discussion before the show mentioned the characteristic echoing sound of horn-driven PA systems. What is the best defense against said effect? Proper speaker placement, alignment delay, or both?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Well, the problem is that these tend to be venues in the round. Anytime you can have your sound going out linearly, I put a link in, you can time out your speakers so the farther away speakers are getting the signal actually slightly later when the stage signal, when the stage sound waves gets to those speakers, then they will generate their sound and it will continue on out. But in these round venues, you have speakers that are coming into a canyon, and the canyon's always going to echo. What I have noticed is most stadiums have gone to smaller, more localized speakers at much lower power levels to clear up the reverb.
Next question.
Jan in Canada is up next with our final question in the regular session. Has there ever been a discussion about hardware and software that's needed for a studio production for internet streaming? And if yes, can you link it?
Someone should put that in the second hour. We should cover that as early as next week. We should just have a second hour where we talk about, if you're in a studio, what are the things that you want to think about and what are we using? I think we talk about that. We've talked about it in every show to some degree, but I don't think we've really backed up and said, if you were building a studio, this is what we would put in it, in different aspects of it. So I think it's a really good question. I don't think we have done that as a single unit of preparing that. So let's if someone can remember to put that in the second hour, it'll remind me to put it in. I think I have a day or two next week that I haven't scheduled. So let's look at that. All right. Now we're changing subjects to Isadora, back to Isadora. What I want to do is show you, just kind of walk you through a little thing that we all came up with. I would love to say that I came up with it, but it was a group effort, especially with a lot of help from Andy, L, and Tlalok, kind of helping with, oh, you might want to do this, oh, you might want to do this, oh, there's this thing here. So this is just really a representation of all of us, having this discussion. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to try to build it in front of all of you. I don't think I know Isadora well enough. I was working on it this morning, like, I'm going to build this thing from scratch. And it's a very simple one. But I was like, I'm going to miss some setting, and then we're going to spend 10 minutes here figuring out what I didn't click. So I'm not doing that. What I am going to show you though is what we built. So the goal here, and then we'll get to your questions. So if you have questions as this comes up, and the intention of this is to talk through this a little bit, show you how we're starting to use Isadora, have you start to think about what might be possible with what we're doing, because it's not just doing something, it's looking at things. That's what I think is really interesting. Is that we have Isadora analyzing footage, analyzing the audio, and then making decisions based on that, which I think is very, very interesting. So this one's nice and simple that we can kind of take a look at it. So I'm going to show you what I started with. So it's very high tech. Let's see here. So this is what it looks like, and all it does, and I don't think you'll be able to hear it. Maybe you can hear it through my mic. So it's just changing colors. Now, as it does that, that's 500 hertz, 1000 hertz, and 1500 hertz. So I have 3 different colors, and at the exact time that they change frequency, exact time they change the color, the frequency changes. And what's interesting about that is now I know when that step is happening in that process, and I know where I am in the step. And so anyway, so now what we did here, and to simulate it, what I did is I actually went and I built this in motion in like 15 minutes. And again, when I show this to you, the goal is that you'll look at it and you'll see a whole bunch of things that you think you could do better, and you probably can. This was like literally live. We just decided. What happened was we were going to do a lab, and I couldn't see my ArtNet, which I can see now. I didn't have a cable to run it to a light, which I have now. But we were like, okay, what else can we do? And I was thinking about this idea around AV sync of just changing colors and changing frequencies, which I've been playing with for a couple of years. And then I was like, I think I've been thinking about this way too hard. I think I could just do it with a very simple, like just 3 things. And so what we did is I simulated it. I've offset that. I just moved all the audio and motion and rendered it out. So I have one called offset. And let me show you what we have.
Hey, Alex, in that one, is the sound driving the color, or is the color driving the sound?
They're just timed together. They're not driving anything. What you're seeing there is that's just a movie. So that's that's just a movie that I made in motion. So and the intention there is that the idea behind that is that what I want to get to, or what I want to build, is something where someone could literally, one of you could hold up an iPad in the Zoom, playing this out. So as long as the speaker is playing it out, if you had an iPad or a phone or an Android, doesn't matter, a tablet, playing out a movie at first, but obviously you could write an app that would do this. So you just write an app that runs in your Android or iPhone or whatever you want to sync test. Hold that up, it starts changing the colors and it starts changing the frequencies together, in a specific order. If you hold it up near your mic, and I can see that, let's just say that it's only sampling the very center of the screen. So just hold it up to the center and let it run. That theoretically it could tell me what the sync is. That's the goal. So I know what then I'll know what I can just get a number that says you're off by 140 milliseconds or 300 milliseconds or whatever that number is. It'll tell you what that number is. This is what Matchbox does. So the Hitomi Matchbox does this, and it costs between $10,000 and $15,000. So I was trying to find something that was less expensive than that.
So it's a pre-recorded latency determiner.
Well, offset. It's not latency. It's determining the offset between the audio and the video. So it's hearing the audio and the video, and they should be changing exactly the same. So when they're right on, it should be 0. So that's the goal there. Go ahead, Courtney.
What kind of codec do you have to render that out to ensure that the audio and the video are arriving in sync out of that?
I'm using ProRes.
Okay, ProRes.
So I don't know.
Constant bit rate, interframe.
Yeah. I think that you would have a hard time being accurate with an H.264 or H.265. Right. I think you would need it to do that. And I've realized that I need to I was going to cut to this, but I realized I don't think I'll be able to see it. I didn't get it I didn't route this correctly to my other monitor. So I'm going to have to use screen share. Sorry about that to everybody who about to, and sorry to Andy. Does that?
One way to find out.
Okay, here we go. All right, so I just realized that if I cut to it, I don't have a way to see the screen, and then I won't be able to talk about it. So anyway, so what we, let me see here. Let's screen share. Oh, Roscoe, can you make me? Here we go. All right, so you should see this now. So this is the change. Now, what's happening here, just to kind of walk through it, this is, again, a very simple Isadora loop here. So I love that I can just roll over this and see what's going through that signal. So you have a movie player, and that movie player, of course, was, we just literally dragged and dropped the video onto it, and it creates a movie player and a projector. So what it's doing is it's playing out these, it's playing out the colors, and this is a simulator. What you would normally do is have an input that you're bringing in from somewhere else, and then you'd be looking at it, but I'm just simulating this. One side note is that I'm also, because Isadora can't see its own audio, I'm feeding this out of Isadora, and then I'm using loopback to bring the audio back into Isadora. So Isadora is watching the audio coming in from Isadora, from loopback. And I don't know if you can see, are you able to see this dialogue?
No.
Okay. Anyway, just sound input is set to what I call is the audio, which is what a loopback that I set up. So we won't worry about that right now. The point is that you're getting audio and video in. Now, this frequency, the sound frequency bands is showing you, kind of where things are. I don't know why the two lower ones why there's data here in these lower areas. And so I have to go back and rebuild the video.
It's almost certainly the fact that Isadora is using the Fourier transform and it's not prepared for aliasing. I mean, that's literally that's why you would have a repeat resonance in that part when you're doing an FFT transform, where your filter size isn't set right. You get aliasing in the lower band.
Got it. Okay, so that's why we have it there. So anyway, so you have this, but it doesn't really matter that this is here. This will work fine. But this just lets us see what's going on. We're not using this at all. We theoretically could use it if we got the right frequencies or whatever, but we don't need it. We don't need it other than to see what's happening here. So you can see that these are changing frequencies, and you can see when I roll over this that we're changing the color, through this here. Now, what we have is a sound frequency watcher. So this is looking at the same, it's whatever's coming into Isadora. And Andy, you feel free to interrupt me anytime I say something wrong.
Yeah, I think you've got it. It's basically it's listening to the incoming sound. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I'm looking for is here you can see I'm looking for 500 hertz. I'm looking for 1500 hertz, 1000 hertz. And I'm giving it a range, a frequency width of 100 hertz, which is the least amount that you can do. And then I can set the trigger level of what level does it have to be at to do that. And I just set it to a point where it started to work. So most of these were at 90 or 100. And then, so what it does is it's when it hits this, it sets a trigger so the trigger here is, you can see it popping there. You can see, so each one of these triggers a timer. Okay, so the timer is set, and you can see them, popping on when it gets to that frequency. We'll wait for it here. There you go. You saw those two get started, and basically what they're told is when this trigger hits, reset whatever it was before and start running. And then we just have to know when to stop. So we've started to run a timer, and we just need to stop it, and then it'll tell us what the time was in between the time it was reset and run and when it was paused again. So that's what the number that you're seeing here repeating over and over again is happening. So each one of these is triggering it. So when they see a different color, they go, "Hey, I saw a color," and then start the timer, and then you have to wait for the pause. So how do we stop that? We're using a comparator, and so first of all, we're using
adjustment to what you said there, Alex. It's listening for the sound, and then it's stopping based on the color. because
That's
we
correct.
expect that the audio. I think you had said the reverse. We
Oh,
want
sorry,
the we want the sound is most likely going to arrive before the video.
Right.
So we've set it up so that we hear the sound, we start a timer, then we see the change in color, and we stop the timer based on that.
That's correct. Sorry about that. Yeah, so we're listening for that sound, starting and stopping based on that, and then over here we're saying measure the color, and so in measure color, it's looking at, and these are pure colors, and so you can see that it's looking at red, green, and blue, and it's looking for 255, 255, 255. Now there is a well, we'll talk about this afterwards. So anyway, when it sees those numbers, those pure numbers there, what it does is it sends the number out here. This is the red comparator, right? So this is red is what number is it? It goes down to here, and the comparator is saying, I want it to be equal to, and I give it value 1. This is the value 1 in the comparator, 255, and then it's just looking at it. Right now it's at 0. Right. And so it's being fed 0. As soon as it gets fed 255, what matches this value, it then sends a true signal out to it. So it goes, okay, that's true. So the idea is that the sound goes in, the timer starts, the measure color sees the color that coincides with the sound, and it triggers it to pause. So that's the whole little process here, is that I'm gonna start when I see the sound and stop when I see it, and the closer these are together, theoretically, the lower the number is. And so that's what we're seeing here. Now, one of the things we'll notice is that these numbers aren't they're not always the same, and they're not exact. And this is a wow and flutter that is based on using 30 frames a second. It's going to be plus or minus 30. Like that's the issue at the moment. So one of the things that I'm planning to do is make a new one of these. It's at 60 and possibly at 120, so that the videos are playing back faster. And I think that will make it more accurate. You
also want to start to move away from using Isadora to play out the video and then loop the audio back into itself, because that's introducing.
It's inherently.
So you want to stream to Isadora from something else.
Exactly.
So it's more realistic.
Yep, exactly. And so this is just a simulator to get it working. But you're absolutely right that what we need to do is get this actually inputting. And I was trying to get that working today, and I just ran out of runway. So anyway, as we look at this, this is kind of a basic thing. And the idea was really to just kind of show you in a very simple way how we can do something relatively useful. There's a couple other things that that's on my tick list to figure out. Number one is improving the quality of this so that we get clearer audio here. And then number two is that I need to in the comparators, I need to have more range. So I think that I could potentially make this, there's other things here that can be used as trackers, but I need to make sure that it can be close to blue, and close to green and close to red rather than something precise. And so I'm going to play with the comparator to give it some more room for error, higher frame rate. The other thing that I want to do is, what's nice about this is we're seeing all of these, and one thing that I want to do is average them. So in each one of these, it's constantly averaging these out. And then I want it to stack on, basically start building a list of samples and constantly average the samples, out so that if you let it run for a little while, it potentially is more accurate. It has a higher sample rate anyway, that would allow it to do that. So, but I think that, again, what I wanted to show is that I'm just really excited with the labs, and that we are, playing with something that potentially, what's interesting to me is that figuring out how to do this and how to work with it took us an hour from of someone who doesn't know what he's doing. Took an hour to, kind of figure out. And then another couple hours, I could probably get this into a much more complex, set of requirements and be able to think through, I need that, or, I need this. then potentially hand it off to a programmer to build something that's more, and or just keep on using it. We could theoretically have something like this that we just open up Isadora. And what's funny is that you could theoretically, if we have a file that you could open up, you could just, anybody can have the free version of Isadora and just open this up and run it, and then they'd be able to see what their sync is, in that process. The other thing that I think about there is the possibility of with Isadora of being able to have every single, so Isadora could theoretically, using REST commands or some kind of command system, talk back to, for instance, the FSHDR or even the X32 using OSC commands. So theoretically, we could get to a point where someone does their mic check, that they literally lift up, we can lift it up. And theoretically, Andy can correct me, but I think theoretically you could, with enough IO, you could literally have everybody lift it up at one time, and it would just go, out and just move everybody's sync around, based on where they're at. Go ahead.
We have independent video feeds of every panelist, and if we have independent audio feeds, we could run this on all of them at once. And as Alex just said, with an OSC command, we take that number that's flowing out of the timer. We could take that number and we can send it via OSC to the X32 with a specific channel assignment to actually not only report the delay, but actually correct the delay inside of the X32. And then we could watch it back and make sure that we're improving. So the system could automatically AV sync everybody who has that thing up in the same beat to be able to get that to go. So there's a lot of headroom that we can build on top of this, because Isadora can talk to all that other stuff to get it set up.
And that could be, because one of the things that we're going to need to do, one of the next steps for us for office hours right now in the interim, while we wait for Zoom to give us ISO, is probably going to get, we're going to be working towards getting individual ISOs from Unity. So everybody's got a Unity channel. And so those things will definitely be out of sync. So rather than spending half an hour dialing each person in, if we can get to a point where we just turn it on and everything just suddenly sync together. Everybody just holds something up and it all syncs across the whole thing. And if it was a little app, it's one of those things that you could send to clients or whatever, and I just need you to hold this up next to you for a second. Just hold it, move it over a little bit. Okay, that's it, and it just immediately syncs them, to that system, which is pretty powerful. And again, it's powerful on a relatively inexpensive app, to make that work. So just wanted to walk through that a little bit and then answer what questions come up. So let's go ahead and jump into the questions, Bill.
Okay, we've got a good little group of them here. First one from Douglas Carmichael. Would there be any way to have Isadora respond to a specific set of OSC commands to trigger specific actions?
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, this is one of the most powerful things about Isadora. So let me picture a little square in the corner, and I'm going to, using my Stream Deck, I'm going to set this to a triangle, and I'm going to set it between red and green. So I have control of the color and control of the shape. Let me show you how I did it. So here's the Isadora patch. I'm going to take off my picture-in-picture. In the bottom here, you can see the output, and here's all that's required to be able to do that. So I'm going to zoom in a bit, make this easier to read. Inside of Isadora, you have what's called the Communications tab, and inside of Communications tab, there's Stream Setup. Inside of Stream Setup, it might be a little hard to read. On channel 5, I've set a stream address to /izzy/faces. And on channel 1, I've set /izzy/color. So I have the ability to listen to 2 different OSC commands that can flow in from an external application. I'll show you how I have it on the companion side in a moment. Now I have 2 OSC multi-listeners. These are the things that actually listen to those channels. So I said, listen to channel 5 and give me the first number off of channel 5. Then listen to channel 1 and give me the first 3 numbers off of channel 1. So now when /izzy/color comes in, I can get the color information, and I can then turn that into a color and put it into the shapes actor to set the color. So again, if I hit green, you'll see the 255 shifts down 1 index in the input there. So I can switch between red and green, and it's changing the color. And then on top, I can change between the faces, between a triangle and a square. 3 faces would be the triangle, 4 would be the square. So then going into companion, all that I had to do here was set up 1 button for triangle and square that just sends /izzy/faces 3 for the triangle and /izzy/faces 4 for the square. And for red and green, I just did /izzy/color 25500 for red and 02550 for the green color. And then again, just putting that all back together, I now can hit the buttons on the Stream Deck and I can switch between the shape independently of the color. So to your question, can you control independent parameters from different OSC triggers? Absolutely.
I have to say that the more we play with Isadora, the more it's like magic. It's just like magic. All right. Next question.
But this is revealing the magic behind the magic. It's
I
even
know.
cooler. Marty Adius of Maryland is our next question. Is the sound coming from the movie player? Where is that connection? I think he was talking about the earlier.
Yeah, the sound is coming from the movie player, and it's just playing out. So in my outputs, let's see if I can. Let's see. It's really hard to show that part of the menu. So anyway, in outputs, it is just set to my general output. What I do is inside of loopback. Here, I can show you that. So all I'm doing is, it's very complicated. I'm just saying, obviously I don't care about the pass through. That doesn't need to be there, so I can just get rid of that. But what I'm doing here is that Isadora, I'm just taking the Isadora output, that's showing up here as an output, and then I'm feeding it back into the output channels, and then Isadora is looking for that output, like you're just looking for the Izzy sound, and so it's Isadora is just playing it out as a projector, and you can just say what output you want it to go to. It could go out to Dante, it could go out to whatever, but it just says I have a movie, I'm playing the video and the audio there. Next question.
Alex, can I jump in there real quick?
Sure.
Yeah, I think also to point out that ideally this becomes a slate, and this gets played back on a device going through a camera too, and then there you can calculate the offset going through the camera with microphones and that kind of stuff. So think of this as...
The goal is not to have it be, the movie player is a little bit of a distraction because it's just a simulator to do this. What we really want is to be able to take an image of something, so that's definitely where we want to go with it. To Roscoe's point. Next question.
Marty Adius in Maryland. Sometimes video can lead audio. How is this design? How does it accommodate both scenarios?
Andy, what would be the most efficient way to do that? I can think of ways to do it. Like if it's less than, go to something else. But go ahead, Andy.
Take a brute force approach and just create another set of comparators and have them do the reverse logic, and then look at the numbers and see which one's positive and which one's negative, and use that one.
Yeah, and you could will the timer show negative?
No, but you'll know
the timer will just be at 0.
You'll have a separate set that you have hooked up in the reverse direction.
Right.
So some of them will be.
You could show the higher one.
Right. You could pick. Well, yes, you'd pick the high one. Would be 0, I suppose, and then the other one would be above that.
So you can say whichever is higher.
Just basically another set of nodes that are wired the reverse way. And then we'd have to look at it to see, like, are we getting negative numbers? Are we getting 0 numbers and positive numbers, and then make a gate or whatever? But you just track which, I put like a bunch of nodes at the top and a bunch of nodes at the bottom, and then comment it and highlight it and say, this is for audio before video. This is for video before audio. And then just multiply it by -1 before you send the OSC command to the X32, so that it's pulling the delay in the correct direction. Because you probably only have a positive number coming out at these timers, but you would just have to set another set of comparators up and hook them up in the reverse direction.
Yep. Next question.
7 Scroll, Brooklyn. Next question. Does Isadora prefer any audio mixer over another?
I think anything that takes, just about anything, but anything that takes OSC, right, Andy?
It likes anything that it supports any of the different protocols that it can communicate with. So that's going to be MIDI, OSC, and then it's going to be GET requests, not POST requests, but GET requests. And then serial, TCP, and ArtNet, and probably
does it do REST?
Does it do REST?
Will it send REST commands?
It does the GET portion. So REST APIs are GETs and POSTs.
Yep.
It does the GETs of a REST API. It doesn't do the POSTs yet. That's a feature request that I've put in.
Right. Next question.
Douglas Heimerkel again. Is there any way to make Isadora listen to specific OSC messages and initiate actions based on them?
Go ahead, Andy.
I think that's a repeat of the question from before.
Yeah. Next question.
Never mind then. Let's move on to here. Roscoe Jones, are there Isadora libraries on GitHub that can be imported in existing projects or just for researching of new ideas and methods?
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. It's not going to be on GitHub, but on the Tricotronics homepage, there's a section called add-ons, and that's where users have posted their own patches and plugins and things like that alongside of the official plugins from Isadora. So that's a good place to start. The forums are also a common place for sharing patches. The tricky thing with GitHub is that all of Isadora's exports are binaries. The Isadora like .izz file is a binary file. It's not like an XML or something like that. So GitHub with binaries is kind of like it's kind of a lost cause, because unless you're going out of your way to write out all the code for each of the actors and post those and then compile those and put those into Isadora, it's kind of like you're kind of leaving the ecosystem to come back into it to collaborate. So it's probably easier just to use the add-ons page there. Now, I think that we should be using GitHub for version tracking and things like that, though, for 2.0 and things like that. So I do tend to post Isadora files up there. It just means I can't like take your changes and somebody else's changes and merge them and get a new Isadora file like I could with source code, in GitHub and things like that. So I think Git is an important workflow, and I'm putting in a feature request to have those IZZ files actually be like XML based, so that we could actually edit them and collaborate on them.
That's great. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael again. Can you get the offset data from Isadora and send that value to an external device?
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, absolutely. You would be able to use an OSC transmit actor, and you would have to look up the X32 or whatever device that you're interested in and its protocol. But I know for the X32 it would be /channel/ and then the 2-digit channel number, and I think it's /delay FX. And then you put in it takes one argument, and it's the amount of delay in milliseconds that you want to apply. So you'd flow that in, you'd track when it changes, and then you'd send it. And you'd have to build out ones for each channel, or you'd come up with some way to propagate the channel numbers into it to create the address. But absolutely, for an X32, that would be the way to do it. Otherwise, you could use REST APIs for the GET requests, or you could use TCP or Serial or all that other stuff I mentioned before.
And you will, what I think is kind of fun is that in the second hour, we're kind of showing you how this works, but we are going to try to get it working in the next, couple weeks. I wouldn't say that it's going to happen next week. I don't want to put too much pressure on Andy, but hopefully by early December you'll see us asking the panelists to lift up a video or to play something out of their phone, and we're going to see how it works, and it'll either work or it won't, and we'll see. It'll either be better or not. But this is part of the 2.0 progress. But again, I feel like if you really think about all these shows and how often we are not accurate in our audio, the idea that we can have a central system that you just lift things up and everything syncs up in a minute would be pretty exciting. Next question.
Alan Scott, New Brunswick, Canada, is up next. Says, does it make difference what audio frequencies you choose? 500, 1000, 1500 being harmonics makes me wonder about the audio processing getting confused.
It doesn't matter. It just wants to be far away. It doesn't have to be super far away. I could have used much farther ones. I could have used 1000, 2000, 3000. I probably could have used, I think that you want to be kind of in the middle there. You don't want to, I think that you end up with a lot of issues if you go too low or too high with other things going on. But I think that, but I could do 1000, 2000, 3000 probably just as easily, maybe even better. At the higher ones, I wouldn't get the same aliasing that we saw before. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I think Alan actually does have a point here that harmonics are going to register in the Fourier transform as a smaller peak adjacent in all the harmonic frequencies that are there, and we are seeing some of that now. The good news is that the harmonic is always going to be weaker than the major note that's coming through. So what we can do is we can gate and compare and say, look, if the power coming off of that frequency is lower than a certain amount, treat it as though it weren't there, and then you can basically build your own filter for the harmonics inside of Isadora. Right. And again, I think the thing that is cool to think about is that we know how to do this mathematically and we know how to do this programmatically, but with Isadora, we can do this with nodes. We can actually build our own filter inside of a nodal ecosystem to apply that to the data processing chain. And this is something I talk about a lot with my my computer vision colleagues and things like that, where it's like, oh yeah, they're building their own convolutional neural networks and spending hours and hours coding it up. And it's like, I'm just grabbing the filter actor and hooking it up to this one. And guess what? It does the same thing that yours does, but it takes half the time. And it's weird to think about using a media server for like professional data science work or for real complex audio processing or things like that. But the truth of it is, it's an open input-output ecosystem that tends to be used for media server things really frequently.
Yeah, and I think that, as far as fast prototyping too, it's just amazing. Like, I do think that eventually the thing that you're seeing here today that we're kind of giving you a hint of, and I felt like, oh, I should wait for another couple of weeks until we refine it and it becomes really but I wanted to kind of show it in its most early stage, and kind of continue to play with it with everybody and get everybody thinking about it. We're going to talk about it again in the labs. We're doing labs at 2:00 today and tomorrow and Friday. And we have a couple things we'll work on there, but and then we're going to start getting into more complex, how to run shows, because what we're starting to do with Office Hours 2.0 is really look at all the other shows, the cooking shows, the Belfast project, the Mobley process, and how do we automate? How do we use what we're doing, what Andy's kind of building, and Andy and Jonathan are building, to start building these kind of remote interfaces to let us design? I think that there's a real future that we're running into here of designing an interface for a show, like really building it. And it's kind of the Crestron, approach to things, except probably way more stable, to be honest. I've had a lot of trouble with Crestron, but Crestron, when it works amazingly well, and it does exactly what the kind of things we want to do here. So anyway, so the point is that anybody could open it up, any web browser, and run a show. And I think that we're at the beginning of something exciting. And this is just one aspect of it, of, oh, by the way, for any show that's out there, once this gets working, any show that's running in this kind of universe / Isadora world has built into it the sync checker. You just turn it on and it syncs everybody up, and then you're ready for the show, which is kind of a cool thing to add to a show, given how much. For some of you, you'll be like, I'm not that impressed, and if you say you're not that impressed, you haven't done a lot of live shows where you had to get sync right, because it's just this constant thing you're chasing. Next question.
Courtney Gooden here in Hollywood, or there in Hollywood, says, does the sample rate of Isadora or the length of the sample loop affect the accuracy of the measurement?
I believe it actually does. Well, the big thing is we turned up the sample rate in Isadora. So Isadora has its internal run rate, which is set to 120 right now. The sample rate that's making it inaccurate right now is that I did this in like 10 minutes while we were talking and in motion, and I just did it at 2997, and I should try it at 120 so that it's running inside of whatever the playback is. Now I got to find a playback system that runs at 120. So that's the other problem. So we do have to deal with the frame rate. Like if we're doing it over Zoom, we won't get any better than 120. Better than 30. So, there's a whole bunch of, issues when it comes to sync that we're going to be plus or minus a frame because of that. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it may be insignificant if the sample rate is high enough in Isadora, the difference between, because it's processing, it's got 3 different look-for processes for the video, 3 different look-for processes for the audio, then it's got the timing loops of the timers, and if all those aren't running concurrently, it's doing all those sequentially, there's going to be a latency between looking for the color and looking for the frequency, et cetera, et cetera. So, but if it's running fast enough, it would be insignificant.
I think that I do have an opinion that if we average the 3 signals and then we stack them over time, so basically keep on adding them and then averaging them in, that if you watch the cycle a couple times, it will actually get to it will give us more samples, and they will find a more accurate number over time, because it'll just increase the number of samples, and then we'll figure it out in the middle. And we'll do all that math with nodes. Next question.
Juan C. Robles in Mexico is up next with, how do you calculate the average of the measured delays in Isadora?
Go ahead, Andy.
So a couple of things we could do here. Inside, this is, again, I just threw this together like in a couple of seconds, but I took a bunch of calculators, right? And so I have some calculators here that are adding 2 numbers, and these are adding 2 numbers, and they get added together, and then we divide by 4, and that's going to be the average number. Tell you what, though, the way I'd actually do this is I would create a JavaScript actor that allows me to write my own code, and then I would just go in here, and I would literally just do a for loop over all the arguments, add them together, divide by the length of the arguments, and return that number. Like, it would take 90 seconds to make that in JavaScript, and it would work for any arbitrary number of inputs and be 1 node. That's part of the paradigm shift that I started to have with Isadora, is like, if I don't have the exact functionality I need, I just quickly draft up something in scripting, and now I have that node. So that's a paradigm for 2.0 pretty frequently. Yeah. But yeah, there's all sorts of options you would have for calculating an average sample. And you could have reset points. We have a reset trigger that if if you hit reset, it dumps all the data from the previous panelist and then looks at the new one and starts to build up a new average for them. We can make more complex behavior, but the ability to do that is absolutely there.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael again. Would there be any way to have Isadora trigger a mouse or keyboard actions at specific coordinate values to automate applications without MIDI OSC support?
Go ahead, Andy.
How to solve this problem for Black Siphon in the Office Hours 2.0 system, where Black Siphon doesn't have any remote control options, but it's an essential part of getting the video out of the hardware in the Blackmagic ecosystem. So rather than try to do something coordinate based, because Isadora doesn't have the ability, it has the ability to listen to keyboard and mouse movement, but it doesn't have the ability to actually pilot your mouse and your keyboard. So how to solve that? So in the Apple ecosystem, we have the benefit of Apple scripts, and Alex was super helpful in getting me started up with that. And what I did is I have this open source Apple script that will basically go through and configure Black Siphon the way that I want it. So what we needed to do then is take Osculator, which can receive an OSC message and then trigger an Apple script. So Isadora sends an OSC message to Osculator. Osculator sees that message and runs an Apple script, and it configures the application that can't be remote controlled. So you can basically use Apple scripts as a way of building remote control functionality inside of the Mac ecosystem. Now in Windows, I've been trying to solve this problem for a couple of years. And I got really into AutoHotkey, which is a language for piloting a mouse and keyboard programmatically through a scripting language that's there. I worked on a plugin for Isadora that allows you to run a file when you trigger it. And so I wrote out all my AutoHotkey scripts, and then I would trigger the scripts based on run commands coming from Isadora. More complicated than it needs to be. I think the simple answer to your question is use Apple scripts for now if you're in the Mac ecosystem. Isadora doesn't natively pilot your keyboard and mouse.
I'm going to assume, Alex, you're muted, but I was going to assume we're going to go on. Douglas Carmichael is next. Will the .izz file from this lab be available on Discord on GitHub?
Yeah, I'll put it in the Isadora file. I'll put it in the Isadora chain. It's pretty simple, and we'll talk about it in the lab this afternoon. But because I want to add a couple things to it, and we'll talk through that.
You might want to consider putting it in the Office Hours GitHub repo, just so that people could make their own changes and comment on what they did, and we could see it there.
Happy to do that. Yeah, so I'll put it there as soon as I figure out how to do that. I'll talk to you, Andy, after that.
Yeah, I'll take care of it.
I make a lot of requests about people doing things with GitHub. I've never actually done anything with GitHub myself. So anyway, we'll go down that path. All right, next question.
Ronzi Wobles of Mexico again. As an extra functionality to the AV Sync patch, is it possible to calculate the latency of a stream?
You would need the source somewhere. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, that's exactly the issue. So you would be able to do it if you're round tripping, right? So if you're sending out from Isadora or something local to Isadora and then coming back in, you could measure that latency. But I don't know how you would measure the latency of, well, I guess what you could do is you could have you could live stream the test pattern, right? You could take it and you could go out to them and back from them and listen for when it returns to you after Isadora generated it. But that would introduce the issue of asynchronous sync problems going out and back. But you could, I mean, if you wanted a separate tone that was just to measure, if assuming you're building your own app or something like that at this point, but you could have a frequency that was just for latency measurement that was ping-ponging between Isadora and the far end and coming back, and then have locally generated tones that were for one directional AV sync. You could probably do something like that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Roscoe.
The only thing I can think of is if we somehow had some sort of play out from an atomic clock timing system that both could reference, and then you could calculate the latency.
And if there was any OCR stuff, you could theoretically have time code just running on it. You should be looking at that and changing that to OCR, which I actually think is built into.
I wrote the OCR actor.
Oh, did you? You have an OCR actor?
I do have an OCR actor that I wrote.
There you go. So we could use Andy's OCR actor and then put a time code out, and then it would tell you exactly what it was, and it would just say funnel these two out. One of the other things that I've been thinking about, if you knew what that was. This will take a little bit of work, but this is kind of spitballing in real time. You could, one of the ways that I measure compression, I'm going to say this, I always say this is fissionable material because I don't recommend that you do this unless you're really serious about compression. because it will ruin how you see everything. Like just sometimes it's better to take the blue pill. And so the blue pill is, or the red pill in this case, is the way I measure the effectiveness of compression is I take my original ProRes file and I render it through the Elemental or whatever I'm executing from. I then take that file, H264, H265, whatever I've streamed it out to. I bring it, and it has a time code in it. I bring that back into Final Cut, and I line up the time codes so that the two frames are lined up, and then I set my compressed one to difference. And so what'll happen is where it's 0 difference, it'll be all black. And if it was a perfect if you take the two ProRes files and put them on top of each other, it'll be purely black. If you take the compression, all you see is the compression. So what you'll see is, black. You'll just see all these boxes, all over the thing, because that's what it did to the compression, because that's what it changed. The problem is that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Like all I see when I watch TV now is that. Like I have to turn it off, but it takes a long time for me to kind of settle in. So again, think about taking the blue pill on this one. But if you do that, one of the things you could do without seeing it is measure the average average luminance value of one way to measure the effectiveness of the compression would be to measure the average luminance, which there is I found an actor in Isadora that did that while I was looking for something else. The average color in the frame. So the higher the luminance value, the less accurate the compression, theoretically. And you could do a bunch of different math there to figure that out so that you could be, calculating the quality of the compression that way. Anyway, something to think about. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up again with, do you think Troikatronics will remove any of the legacy actors like DV device control, which depend on hardware that isn't supported on modern Macs or PCs?
Go ahead, Andy.
Isadora has a challenge where it's basically like a freight train where they've added cars to the back of it over the years, and now it's got to keep pulling all of that stuff. I think that eventually there's going to be sort of a realization that a lot of that legacy stuff needs to be dropped in order to move into the next chapter. I think that cuts across a lot. I mean, this is me speaking sort of from my own personal opinion here, but one of those things, could be OpenGL, right? There's so many opportunities in Metal, but of course, you would lose that on the Windows side. So, is there? I always wonder about that, right? Like it's, the combination of legacy and cross-platform, like, it makes a subset of people very, very happy to have those things, but is it keeping us from having functionality that we would otherwise want to know? I know that like just the QA that has to happen on making a new Isadora update for thousands of backlogged actors, most of which are probably not used in production anymore, besides a subset of people, takes time that could be used in other new things that we would care about. So, I think Isadora has really sunk in on complete backwards compatibility even between major version releases. I wonder, like you note here with the DV device control, you can't even run those devices on the operating system that you could run Isadora on. So do you really need to be supporting that and doing QA on that? I don't think that they do. But I think it would be a change in philosophy for Troikatronics.
Yeah. Good, Roscoe.
Yeah, sometimes when you have older hardware, you just have to know that you have to stop upgrading if you want to continue to support it with software at some point in time. So I think hopefully that's the approach they'll take. They'll just say, you're going to be cut off, so don't upgrade. You don't run the latest upgrade if you don't want to lose control of your hardware.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Or they could just develop a light version, which is what operating systems have done that don't support, they cut off the legacy support for other stuff and just make it the newer stuff, but still support it in the original version.
Yep. Next question.
Stan Chan in Roseville is up next with, can this be done with open source components? What is currently missing other than the node-based orchestration layer?
Go ahead, Andy.
I mean, I'll defer to Alex on some of like other things that you've tried over the years to see what that is. But what I will say is that, I've tried Node-RED, I've tried, a bunch of other solutions for compositors, some of which were open source, some of which were closed source. I just keep coming back to Isadora because it has a sort of a quirkiness to it that makes it really conducive for rapid drafting. Again, it was created by a devising theater community where that is the MO for how work is produced. It's created by artists for artists. And for me, the paradigm shift is thinking about programming as an art allows me to move very, very quickly through the type of stuff that we're trying to do here and figuring things out and not being concerned about, like Alex refers to so often, pouring concrete. I feel like in a lot of other compositors, even nodal compositors, they sort of they commit you to a vertical or a path of going through the software, like you're in this stage and then you're in this stage and then you're in this stage, which makes it hard to go and back propagate changes that you're finding as you're going through it. So I like the fact that Isadora is basically just a blank canvas where I can throw things together, and the way that I can adjust things and the way that it handles types and all of that built up philosophy of 20 years of trying to make, theater work on that piece of software that Mark's put into it, I think is an assistant in the way that we come up with these things. So there's something about it's very hard to define, but there's something about the way that Isadora handles it that makes it easier to do than other compositors.
I also think that you could theoretically get to a point where you're really happy with Isadora, and for some reason you want to open source it, you can always at that point reprogram it in something else that doesn't have the same level of. But I think the other thing is, remember that once you build it in Isadora, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Andy, you just can't save, right? So you can open any file. So you could, so someone could build something and then send it to people. So you could have people running an Isadora system as long as they don't need to change it and save it out. Is the only reason that they wouldn't be able to just run it, and so, which I think is very powerful. Like, I think it's very powerful to say, I don't need everybody to own the app to execute it. I just need them to own it to author it, and I think that's a really powerful thing. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, our second to last one this morning. When I built a MIDI clock generator on Isadora, I had to increase the general service task to 30 times per frame at 60 frames per second to keep the generated clock data accurate. When do you need to increase the frames per second in the general service task in non-video use cases?
I go with Andy.
Yeah, let's be clear about the general service task. It never applies to video. It's specifically a multiple on top of the video. So for video-related workflows, you actually don't need to increase the general service task. You would increase FPS if you're looking to do things with the video pipeline, and then the GST sits on top of that as a multiplier. So you increase FPS for relatively obvious reasons. The general service task sometimes is a little more elusive because it's kind of unclear what that means. That is the speed at which Isadora processes data inside of the patch. And it's a multiple of the frame rate so that things are marching and landing at the same beats, so that every couple iterations of running the Isadora process, a video frame gets marched. So the idea with the general service task, and the reason that I suggested to you to set it to 30 times a second, at the very bottom of the preferences view, you'll see Isadora's time resolution, which is basically how much time elapses between iterations of the general service task. And so if you're trying to detect things that are sub-millisecond, layers of accuracy that are required to do what you're doing, you have to increase the general service task that Isadora as a process can refresh frequently enough and propagate values through the actors with enough speed that you can actually detect a change that's that minute. So for the compare thing that we were doing before, I had also suggested to Alex to increase the general service task to some higher multiple, like 30 times, 12 times. It increases your overall CPU usage, but in applications that don't require high CPU usage in the first place, because we're not dealing with tons of video and effects, rocking at a very high general service task is a better way to use that performance. Again, I think that you have to always balance, because Isadora is designed to do media server things, but also data processing things. And so the way that you play with FPS and general service task is a dance that you're going to do on a patch by patch basis to get the right balance for the right speed and resolution that you need for your project file.
Next question.
And Lenny Nelson, from San Antonio, Texas, is up next. How good is the OCR? Could a camera pointed at a scoreboard generate data for graphics?
Go ahead, Andy.
It's not very good, even though I made it. It's basically it's not ready for prime time yet. What I did is I took OpenCV and I ported it to Isadora, and then I used OpenCV's very robust set of OCR tools to turn it into text. The problem is I don't yet have a really efficient pipeline in Isadora for doing this. So like my QR code actor is really expensive to run inside of the Isadora patch. It burns a lot of processor cycles to run that. Isadora doesn't natively support like TensorFlow or things like that, right? Which, we could talk about all the things that we wished it could do, right? But it does quite a bit. But those legacy CPU-based actors that have to move a frame from the GPU to the CPU or from the CPU back to the GPU are interrupts. And this is getting pretty technical, but basically it's very expensive to do that. Now with Apple Silicon and the high bandwidth connection between the GPU and the CPU, optimistic that we'll get back some of that, OpenCV level functionality at very high speeds. But again, Isadora would have to choose to go really vertical on that Mac platform to reap the benefits of those types of architectures. So you win some, you lose some. But I think, hold off on the OCR actor for now. It's very much an alpha, but those are the kind of things that we're thinking about long term, right?
I think it's powerful. I think it's a pretty exciting little platform. I'm really glad that Andy and Tlaloc and Elle have helped us kind of keep moving forward and starting to get our head around it. My head is just starting to turn. It's like one of those things that now I'm kind of getting it, and we're gonna keep moving forward. We're gonna do a couple more simple things this week. So I would highly recommend coming to 2:00 in the after hours, both Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We'll kind of be cleaning this up a little bit, talking through it in a more open way, and then also finish up the DMX stuff that we started either tomorrow or Friday. And then today will probably be more of this, and tomorrow will be DMX, and then Friday will be cleaning that up. And then we're going to start talking about shows. So next week, we're going to start talking about like how do we do office hours 2.0 style things for other shows. And so I think that us all learning together how to pull these things together is going to make a big difference in what happens is that if a bunch of us can learn how to do this together, we'll all start feeding off of each other and being able to answer the questions. And we're not all depending. Right now, we're all depending on Andy, Tlaloc, and Elle to kind of help us through that. And the goal is to get to a point where we can kind of help ourselves. We still ask them when we need to, but a lot of the basic stuff that helps other people get on the road. And I think that as many of us start doing it, as you can see, what's already happened with some of the cloud production, with Belfast projects style things, as we all start working together on it, we all start figuring out new things and better ways to do it and other ways to do it. And so I think that, and I really think that we're on to something pretty exciting. And so does NPR, because they talked about the Belfast method. Sorry, I'm just excited that we have something, that our team has something on a show in NPR. So and for PC Magazine. So anyway, so that's kind of cool. So let's do more of that. Anyway, thanks to the panel. We're stopping a little early. I have a really hard out that I have to prepare for, so we're stopping just a little early today. Thank you to the producers for the great questions and pulling this conversation forward. We can't do it without you, and we also can't do it without the panelists. Thank you for all the input and all the answers that you contribute back to the group. We really appreciate it. And now we're going to jump into after hours. Remember tomorrow, what are we doing tomorrow? We're talking about office hours again. So we'll do that tomorrow. It should be a lot of fun. All right, see you then.